Across our dinner table, my husband's ex-girlfriend focused her gaze on him and said, "I could give you a child, Leo, if you really want one, since your wife can't." He glanced in my direction, I'm sure, fully expecting me to shatter into a million pieces. Instead, I managed to smile and whispered, "You should follow your heart." The very next morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer, but the chain of events that was set in motion after that, absolutely no one could have predicted what was coming. Chloe Vance uttered those words with such a stunning lack of difficulty, as if she were offering to loan us her spare car keys, not proposing the total and complete destruction of my marriage. "I could give you a child, Leo, if you really want one, since your wife can't." She delivered the line while staring at Leo with an exaggerated, mournful expression, her hand sliding across the surface of my dining room table to come to a rest on his arm. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking. I had carefully arranged our wedding china. I had uncorked a bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery bill, all while telling myself that hosting my husband's ex was a testament to my own maturity. I was proving that our relationship was strong enough, secure enough, to absorb a piece of his past into our present without it posing any kind of threat. Before we go any further, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here, for bearing witness to these stories of resilience and self-worth. If you believe that every single person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, especially in the sanctity of their own home, please consider subscribing. It's completely free, and it helps us share these important narratives with other people who might really need to hear them. Now let's get back to how this whole situation unraveled. I had been so profoundly wrong. This dinner wasn't about security. This was a meticulously planned ambush, and I had been foolish enough to provide the battlefield myself. Leo didn't defend me. That was the detail, the tiny, soul-crushing detail that ultimately altered the course of my entire life. He didn't immediately shut down her offer or point out how wildly inappropriate she was being. No. He turned his head and simply looked at me, his expression completely unreadable, hovering somewhere between morbid curiosity and genuine anticipation. He was waiting to see how I would react to this ultimate act of humiliation, performed in the home we had built together. In that single frozen moment, every single excuse I had been making for him over the previous 6 months simply shattered. The late nights he swore were for work, the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the way his entire energy would shift, becoming vibrant and alive whenever Chloe's name was mentioned. This had never been an innocent friendship. It was a slow-burning betrayal, and I had been either too trusting or too terrified to acknowledge it until Chloe metaphorically held my face in her hands and forced me to look. I smiled at my husband and spoke the 5 words that would detonate our marriage. "You should follow your heart." He thought I was giving him my blessing. What I was actually doing was handing him the rope to hang himself, and I was simultaneously giving myself a front-row ticket to watch as I systematically dismantled everything he mistakenly believed was his. But to truly understand how I arrived at that point, serving my own humiliation on a platter of fine china, we have to rewind the clock by 6 months. Back to a time when I still believed that Leo and I had forged something unbreakable. Back when I was naive enough to think that 12 years of marriage represented something more substantial than just a shared mortgage and a collection of inside jokes we no longer told. On paper, our life was the kind people envied. We owned a beautifully restored Craftsman bungalow in Denver, a project we had poured our weekends into, stripping away layers of old wallpaper and playfully bickering over endless shades of white paint. Leo was in corporate finance, steadily climbing the ladder with his sights set on a partnership. I was a client relations manager for a top-tier marketing firm, a job that was not only lucrative, but one that I found genuinely fulfilling. Our lives operated on a smooth, predictable track. He had his early morning gym sessions. I had my long, meditative Sunday walks through Washington Park. We took turns making dinner and usually spent our evenings watching historical documentaries on the couch. Our friends often commented on how solid we seemed, how lucky we were to have navigated the notoriously tricky early years of marriage and emerged even stronger on the other side. What our friends couldn't see, of course, was just how much of that perceived solidity was merely routine. They didn't see the conversations we had stopped having because talking about household logistics and scheduling was so much easier than talking about our actual feelings. They didn't see how our physical intimacy had dwindled into something that felt scheduled, a task to be checked off a to-do list rather than a spontaneous expression of desire. We had mastered the art of coexisting within the same space without ever truly connecting, like two actors perfectly performing the roles of husband and wife, never once pausing to question if the play itself still held any meaning. The first hairline cracks in our foundation appeared about 3 years into our marriage, when I was diagnosed with severe endometriosis. I can still feel the cold, slick leather of the chair in the specialist's office, my hand clutching Leo's as the doctor laid out our limited options with a clinical, detached sympathy. The treatments would be invasive, aggressive, and came with zero guarantees of success. Leo squeezed my fingers and promised we would face it all together. He told me, with what seemed like genuine conviction, that children were not the only path to building a meaningful life. I believed him, mostly because I had to. We then endured 18 brutal months of fertility treatments, a grueling gauntlet of procedures that left me bloated, hormonal, and in a state of perpetual exhaustion. It effectively turned my body into a failed science experiment. After the fourth and final unsuccessful attempt, we sat in the sterile silence of the clinic's parking lot and mutually agreed to stop. Leo said he would rather have me healthy and whole than continue chasing a ghost. He said it with such conviction that I was flooded with gratitude, not guilt. I felt relieved, not inadequate. That day, we went home, opened a bottle of wine, and began to map out all the wonderful things our child-free life would allow. Spontaneous travel, renewed focus on our career ambitions, the simple freedom to be selfish. And for a while, it really seemed to work. We channeled all of our energy into our home renovation, into weekend getaways to Aspen and Santa Fe, into hosting elaborate dinner parties where we would serve complex dishes and tell funny, rehearsed stories. We became that couple, the one that served as living proof that you didn't need kids to be happy. But beneath that carefully constructed surface, a fundamental shift had occurred. The shared loss, which should have bound us closer together, had somehow managed to wedge us apart. Leo became quieter, more withdrawn. The long hours he spent at the office got even longer, and our conversations rarely strayed beyond surface-level planning and logistics. I, in turn, threw myself into my career and my friendships, meticulously filling the empty spaces where our intimacy used to be with a constant flurry of activity and professional achievements. I told myself this was just the natural evolution of a long-term marriage. The initial fiery passion inevitably cools, settling into a more mature, stable ember. We still cared for each other. We still functioned as a team. The love had just become quieter. I convinced myself that this stability wasn't just enough. It was actually preferable to the chaotic emotional intensity of our early years. Then Chloe Vance floated back into Leo's life and shattered every single comfortable lie I had been telling myself. He first mentioned her on a Tuesday evening in March, a full 6 months before the dinner that would end it all. He said he had bumped into an old friend at a downtown gallery opening, someone he had dated briefly back in college, before we had even met. Chloe had just moved back to Denver after spending a few years as a digital nomad and was now doing consulting work for various tech startups. They had grabbed coffee, he said, just to catch up on old times. He delivered this news with such practiced nonchalance, such apparent innocence, that I barely registered the flicker of alarm in my gut. I asked if I knew her from our college days, and Leo said probably not, explaining that they had broken up long before he and I were introduced by mutual friends during our senior year. He described her as a force of nature, someone who was brilliant but wildly unstable, always making dramatic life choices and expecting the entire world to adjust to her chaos. I should have paid more attention to the way he lingered on that description, the way his eyes seemed to light up as he talked about her. In the weeks that followed, Chloe's name began to pepper our conversations with increasing frequency. She had recommended a new tapas restaurant that we absolutely had to try. She was consulting on a project that was connected to Leo's firm and had some fascinating takes on corporate strategy. She remembered some hilarious, obscure story from their college days that made him laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. Each individual mention on its own seemed trivial and harmless, but taken together, they were forming a mosaic that I was trying desperately not to see. Leo started checking his phone compulsively during dinner, a small, private smile playing on his lips as he read messages he never offered to share with me. He'd suggest we skip our usual weekend hike so he could catch up on some work, but I noticed his laptop was often closed when I would bring him a cup of coffee. He bought new clothes, started a new, more intense workout regimen, and began paying attention to his grooming in a way he hadn't in years. He would come home animated, full of stories about his day, but the energy would seem to drain out of him the moment it was just the two of us, as if he were conserving his best self for someone else. I saw all of it. I saw every single sign, and I explained it all away. Because to acknowledge the emerging pattern would mean asking questions I was terrified to have answered. I told myself he was just having a midlife reinvention, that it was healthy for him to have his own friends and interests separate from me. I forcefully pushed down the rising tide of unease because I had invested so much in the narrative of our solid, mature marriage. Admitting that something was profoundly wrong felt like admitting my own failure. Then Leo suggested we have Chloe over for dinner, and my supply of excuses finally ran dry. He framed it as a sign of our mutual confidence, proof that we were so secure in our relationship that we could welcome his past without feeling any threat. He said Chloe had mentioned wanting to meet me, that she felt awkward about reconnecting with him without knowing his wife. It all sounded so reasonable, so modern, so much like something a healthy, well-adjusted couple would do. So I agreed, even as a tight knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. I spent 2 full days preparing for that dinner. I chose a wine from a Napa vineyard we had visited on our 5th anniversary. I planned a menu of dishes I had perfected over the years, recipes I knew were impressive. I set the table with our wedding china, the expensive set my mother had insisted we register for, which we only ever used for special occasions. I told myself I was being a gracious host, that this was my chance to firmly establish my place, to show Chloe that I was the one who had built a real, lasting life with Leo, while she was off chasing whimsical fantasies across the globe. I chose my outfit with surgical precision, a simple but elegant dress designed to project an air of effortless confidence. As I arranged flowers in a vase and checked the roast in the oven for the final time, I genuinely believed I was rising above petty jealousy. I had absolutely no idea that I was just setting the stage for my own execution, lighting the candles for a performance in which I was the designated fool. Chloe arrived right on time. I heard her voice first, a warm, throaty laugh that sounded far too familiar in its interplay with Leo's, a clear sign that they had been talking often enough to develop their own private rhythm. When Leo opened the front door, she swept into the house, draped in a silk dress that clung to her figure like a second skin. She carried a bottle of expensive champagne and an aura of self-possession that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Leo gave her a hug that lingered just a few seconds too long, his hand resting on the small of her back with a casual intimacy that made my throat constrict. She turned to me, her smile bright but clearly practiced. "You must be Elena. I've heard so much about you." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the slightly too intense eye contact, and welcomed her into my home with a warmth I absolutely did not feel. And so the performance began, a slow, agonizing march toward the moment when Chloe would finally drop the pretense and Leo would reveal exactly who he had become. The first course was just as I had dreaded it would be. Chloe held court, her stories animated and dramatic, her laughter a little too loud, her casual touches on Leo's arm a little too frequent. I smiled and nodded and diligently refilled wine glasses, all while watching my husband transform into a version of himself I hadn't seen in years. He was engaged, leaning in, laughing freely and without reservation. We had just cleared the plates from the main course when Chloe set down her fork with a deliberate, theatrical slowness. The gesture felt rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for this exact cue to make her move. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I felt it in my bones, the same way the air goes still and heavy right before a violent thunderstorm. She looked directly at Leo, her head tilted in a pantomime of compassion that was nothing more than pure, calculated cruelty. She said she'd been thinking a lot about something he had mentioned to her in confidence, his deep, lingering desire to have a family. My hand froze where it rested around the stem of my wine glass. The entire world seemed to shrink down to that one sentence, the words confirming that my husband had been sharing our most private grief with his ex-girlfriend. Feelings he had stopped sharing with me years ago. We hadn't spoken about children, not in any real or meaningful way, since the day we had agreed to stop the treatments. He had sworn to me that he was at peace with it. He had promised that having me was enough. I had trusted him. I had believed our decision was mutual and final. But apparently, Leo had been having very different conversations with Chloe. Conversations about a future that didn't include me, except as the central problem that needed to be solved. Chloe's voice dropped into a conspiratorial whisper, a tone that physically excluded me from the conversation she was now having about my own life. She told him she had been mulling over his situation, thinking about what he was missing in his life and what she, perhaps, could offer that I couldn't. Then came the words that vaporized my marriage in an instant. She told Leo she could give him a child if he really wanted one because I wasn't capable of it. She said it so casually, as if she were offering him a stock tip. Her hand reached across my table, over my wedding china, to touch his arm in a gesture of support that made my stomach revolt. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Every sound in the universe seemed to vanish except for the frantic, thick pounding of my own heart in my ears. Time stretched, seconds turning into an eternity as I waited. I waited for Leo to leap to my defense, to tell her how monstrous and cruel she was being, to protect me from this grotesque assault happening in our own home. He did not. Instead, Leo turned his head to look at me, his face a mask of unreadable curiosity and expectation. He was waiting. He was actually waiting to see how I would react to being flayed open in my own dining room. In that one silent moment, every lie I had told myself, every excuse I had made for his growing distance, collapsed into a pile of rubble. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the new clothes, the sudden vibrant energy he only seemed to possess when her name came up. This wasn't friendship. This was a systematic, calculated betrayal. And I had been too invested in the fantasy of our perfect marriage to see it. Chloe was still touching his arm, her expression a mask of smug satisfaction. She was waiting for the breakdown, the emotional explosion she had so carefully engineered. She wanted tears. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to validate the narrative she had so clearly created in her mind, that I was the inadequate, hysterical wife standing in the way of his true happiness. 1,000 different responses flashed through my mind. I could hurl my glass of red wine directly at her smug face. I could scream at her to get out of my house. I could unload 12 years of resentment and disappointment onto Leo for his silent, damning complicity. But in that instant, something else took over. Something cold and clear and utterly unfamiliar. I looked at Chloe's triumphant smirk, at the way her fingers were still resting proprietarily on my husband's arm, and then at Leo's uncertain face, waiting for my cue. And I understood that losing my temper would be giving them exactly what they wanted. It would prove I was the problem. It would give Leo the justification he needed to leave, to rewrite our shared history with me as the villain. So I didn't give them the scene they were so clearly craving. I made a choice. I smiled. Not a warm smile, but a sharp, chilling smile that came from a place far beyond simple rage. I looked directly at my husband, held his gaze, and spoke with a calm that felt almost alien to me. You should follow your heart. My voice was quiet and steady. I watched as Chloe's victorious expression faltered, quickly replaced by confusion. She had been prepared for a fight, not this eerie, unsettling composure. Leo, on the other hand, looked almost relieved, and that told me everything I needed to know. He mistook my calm for surrender, my composure for consent. He thought I was giving him a green light to chase whatever twisted fantasy he and Chloe had been cooking up together. They were both wrong. I wasn't giving him permission. I was giving him the rope he would use to hang himself. They thought they had just won. They had no idea I had just declared war. Chloe finally retracted her hand from Leo's arm, looking uncertain for the first time all night. She tried to rally, suggesting we move to the living room for coffee and dessert, as if the last 5 minutes hadn't just happened. Leo started to get up, his eyes still on me, a mixture of confusion and profound relief on his face. I excused myself from the table, my voice a perfect model of grace. I cited a sudden headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head was pounding, but with a potent cocktail of rage and crystalline clarity. Please enjoy dessert without me, I said. I just need to go lie down for a bit. Leo made a weak protest, a belated and transparent attempt to feign concern, but Chloe placed a hand on his arm again, her voice a low murmur. Let her rest, Leo. She probably just needs some space to process. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of her, deciding what I needed in my own home, made my jaw ache. I walked upstairs, my steps measured and deliberate, fighting the urge to sprint. I could hear their voices resuming below, softer now, conspiratorial. They were undoubtedly dissecting my reaction, trying to figure out if I had really just accepted her proposition. They would find out soon enough what kind of storm was coming their way. I closed our bedroom door and locked it, my hands finally beginning to tremble. The mask of composure I had worn downstairs was cracking at the edges. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to their muffled voices drift up from the first floor. Chloe's laughter grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over my contacts. What I was about to do was irreversible. There would be no second chances, no working things out. Then I thought of Leo's face, that look of detached curiosity as I was being publicly humiliated, and my thumb moved with absolute certainty. Miss Sterling answered on the third ring, her voice sharp and alert even at this late hour. She was the best divorce attorney in Denver, known for her merciless, take-no-prisoners approach to litigation. I laid out the situation for her in cold, clinical detail, my voice low and steady even as silent tears streamed down my face. I told her about the dinner, about Chloe's calculated cruelty, and about Leo's stunning, unforgivable failure to defend me. Patricia Sterling listened without uttering a single word. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then she asked, "Do you understand what you're asking for, Elena? This isn't just a divorce, this is a scorched earth strategy." Hearing it stated so bluntly only solidified my resolve. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back at me looked harder, colder, like a stranger. The woman who had spent years accommodating Leo, making herself smaller to keep the peace, was gone. She had been incinerated at that dinner table. "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what I want." We scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Her instructions were precise. Act completely normal all weekend. Give him no reason to suspect a thing. Document everything. Secure your personal assets. Her voice was a calm, methodical guide through the impending demolition of my life. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, letting my breathing even out. Then I went to work. I screenshotted every text exchange between Leo and Chloe I could find, conversations I had previously dismissed as harmless. Plans to grab coffee that I now saw were coded rendezvous, inside jokes that pointedly excluded me, complaints about our marriage he had been sharing with her for months. Each screenshot was another piece of evidence of my own willful blindness. I then photographed the safe where I kept the deeds and receipts for major assets, proof of the inheritance from my grandmother I had used for the down payment on our house and the bonuses I had personally invested in it. Downstairs, I heard the front door open and close, Chloe's voice saying goodnight. I moved to the window and watched them in the driveway. Leo had his hand on her back again. The gesture that would have broken my heart just hours earlier now just felt like Exhibit A. She turned and touched his chest, her hand lingering as they spoke in low tones. Their body language was undeniable. I cataloged every single detail. When Leo came back inside, I was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, playing the role of the dutiful wife one last time. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tentative and cautious. I turned and gave him that same placid, unreadable smile. "Just tired." Hosting is a lot of work. I suggested we watch a movie. The relief that washed over his face was galling. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He had no idea the bullet was already in the chamber and my finger was firmly on the trigger. We sat on the couch, and when he reached for my hand, I let him hold it, my mind a cold ledger of assets and legal timelines. Saturday morning, I was up before dawn, planning my day like a general mapping out a battle. I made Leo his favorite breakfast, humming a tune as I cooked. He came downstairs looking surprised and genuinely pleased by my cheerful demeanor. He said he was meeting a friend at the gym. "Have fun," I chirped, and the moment his car was out of the driveway, I was in motion. First, the bank. I opened a new account solely in my name and transferred exactly half of our joint savings, an amount I could legally move without triggering any immediate alarms. Next, I drove to a storage unit I had scouted online, paying cash for 3 months in advance. For the next few hours, I systematically removed everything from the house that was indisputably and legally mine: my grandmother's heirlooms, artwork I had purchased before our marriage, my personal photo albums. I made 3 trips, methodically emptying our home of my personal history, securing what was mine before he could ever lay a claim to it. Sunday passed in a blur of forced normalcy. That evening, while Leo was in the shower, his iPad lit up on the nightstand. A message from Chloe. I picked it up. She was talking about timelines, about a fresh start, and about a fertility consultation she had already booked, asking if he wanted to come with her. I photographed the message, my hands perfectly steady, my heart a block of ice. I put the device back exactly where it had been. When Leo came out of the bathroom, he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. "I love you too," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. He fell asleep quickly. I lay awake beside him for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many nights he had lain here, plotting his new life while I slept beside him, trusting and oblivious. Monday morning felt like the dawn of a new world. I slipped out of bed, showered, and put on my navy blue power suit, the one I reserved for my most important client meetings. I applied my makeup like it was armor. The woman in the mirror looked formidable, her eyes betraying none of the turmoil raging inside. Good. Leo was at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone, barely looking up as I mentioned I had an early meeting. I kissed him goodbye, a final cold press of lips against his cheek. He smiled distractedly, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to end. The drive to Ms. Sterling's office was surreal. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching a movie of my life. Her conference room table was covered in documents, a war map of my new future. The divorce petition was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It detailed the entire timeline of the emotional affair, using the text messages as irrefutable proof. It clearly established my overwhelming financial contributions to our marriage, making it clear that the house was, by all rights, mine. But the restraining order was the true work of art. Patricia argued that Chloe's proposition, delivered in my home, deliberately exploiting my known infertility, constituted intentional infliction of emotional distress. Leo's failure to defend me made him complicit. The frantic, emotional texts I had sent my sister, Sophia, in the immediate aftermath of that dinner served as a real-time record of the psychological damage. The order would force Leo to vacate our home immediately and stay 500 feet away from me at all times. I signed every single page, my hand rock steady. The plan was executed with military precision. The papers were filed with the court by noon. At 2:30 p.m., a process server would walk into Leo's open plan office and hand them to him in front of all of his colleagues. Public humiliation for public humiliation. At 2:30 on the dot, my phone began to ring. Leo, over and over again. I watched it buzz, picturing his face twisting from confusion to shock to sheer, unadulterated panic. After the fifth call, I blocked his number. Then Chloe started calling, her first voicemail a shrill torrent of accusations and disbelief. I blocked her too. At 3 o'clock, Patricia called. Leo's lawyer had been in touch, sputtering threats and indignation. She sounded amused. "Go home, Elena," she said. "The house is yours." I drove back to a home that was suddenly entirely mine. The locks had already been changed. Security cameras were being installed. In the garage, I had left several boxes neatly packed with all of Leo's personal belongings. I had left him everything he needed to start over, but nothing that was ours. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the living room window, watching the sunset. The relief was so profound it almost made me dizzy. My phone buzzed all evening. His mother, crying. His best friend, telling me to be an adult about this. His sister, lecturing me on the importance of forgiveness. Not one of them asked what had actually happened. They only had Leo's self-serving, victimized version of the story. I forwarded all the messages to Patricia and then turned off my phone. That feeling of peace lasted until the next morning when my sister Sophia showed up at my door, her face pale with guilt. She confessed that she had seen Leo and Chloe together weeks ago, first at a coffee shop sitting far too close, their body language unmistakably intimate. Then, 2 weeks later, at an upscale restaurant downtown. She had been so uncomfortable and shocked that she had snapped a photo on her phone. She showed it to me now, her hands shaking. It was them, tucked away in a corner booth. Chloe's hand was on Leo's face, a gesture of unmistakable tenderness. He was looking at her with an unguarded adoration that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It was one thing to read their texts. It was another thing entirely to see the photographic proof. I forwarded the photo to Patricia. It was Exhibit B. That afternoon, Leo's parents, Arthur and Helen, arrived unannounced. I met them at the door, physically blocking the entrance. "How could you do this to our son?" Helen wept, accusing me of being vindictive, of punishing Leo for my own infertility. The sheer absurdity of her statement made me laugh, a short, sharp, bitter sound. "I'm the one with endometriosis, Helen," I said calmly. Arthur, more composed, demanded proof of any wrongdoing. Without saying a word, I showed them my phone, the screenshots of Leo and Chloe planning their future together, the photos Sophia had taken at the restaurant. Arthur's face went white. Helen's sobs changed in tone, her anger collapsing into shocked disappointment. They left without another word. The preliminary hearing was a blur. Leo, looking haggard and lost, testified that he had been shocked into silence by Chloe's offer. His lawyer tried to paint me as a hysterical and vindictive woman, but Patricia had prepared me well. When his lawyer suggested I had misinterpreted Chloe's compassionate offer, I looked directly at the judge and said, "Offering to impregnate another woman's husband in her own home is not compassion. It's a hostile takeover. Then, in a moment of cinematic self-destruction, Chloe, who had shown up to the hearing uninvited, stood up in the gallery and began shouting. She accused me of weaponizing my infertility, of playing the victim. The judge's gavel cracked down like a gunshot. "This is not a hearing about family planning," Judge Morrison said, her voice dripping with ice. "This is about a man who allowed his wife to be cruelly humiliated in her own home by a woman with whom he was clearly having an emotional affair." She then extended the restraining order to include Chloe, who was promptly escorted, sputtering with indignation, from the courtroom by 2 bailiffs. I watched Leo's eyes close in utter defeat. His force of nature had just handed me the match to burn his entire defense to the ground. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The restraining order was upheld. I was granted exclusive use of the house, pending the final settlement. The preliminary asset division was heavily in my favor. 4 months later, the divorce was final. I kept the house, the vast majority of our assets, and my dignity. Leo was left with his mountain of regrets and a professional reputation that was in tatters. I heard, through the grapevine, that he and Chloe tried to make a go of it. Their grand romance, built in the fantasy world of secret texts and forbidden lunches, lasted a whole 6 weeks in the real world before it imploded under the weight of reality. Now, the silence in my house is peaceful, not lonely. I've redecorated, exorcising the ghosts of my marriage room by room. I host dinner parties filled with real laughter and genuine connection. Sometimes I think about that disastrous dinner with a strange sense of gratitude. Chloe thought she was offering Leo a baby, but what she really gave me was clarity. Leo thought my quiet response was permission, but it was a declaration of war he was too arrogant to hear. The sweetest victory wasn't the house or the money. It was watching him realize far too late that he had traded 12 years of a real, committed partnership for a cheap fantasy that dissolved on contact with reality. I learned that following your heart is good advice, but only if your heart is connected to your brain. Leo followed his straight off a cliff. I followed mine back to myself. If this story of strategic justice and reclaimed power had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. For me, the most powerful part was when Elena calmly told Leo to follow his heart, knowing she had already launched her devastating counterattack. What was your favorite moment in this revenge story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Craving more stories of betrayal, revenge, and sweet, sweet justice? Subscribe and smash that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. End of story.